We will never know the names of the 7 babies nurse Lucy Letby murdered. They haven't been revealed to protect them and their families. We do know that 5 of them were baby boys and 2 were baby girls. And there are 6 more infants Letby tried to kill. They will now be approaching their 8th birthdays. During Letby's long trial, the court heard that her favourite way of murdering them was by injecting them with air. She was, the prosecution said, in effect playing God. Cheshire Police have announced today that they will now be reviewing the care of thousands of babies at 2 hospitals where Letby had worked. Tonight we'll ask why bosses at the Countess of Chester Hospital failed to investigate the suspicious deaths of so many babies, despite consultants repeatedly trying to blow the whistle about the numbers dying on Letby's watch. The hospital didn't answer that or any other questions today. The answer may come via an inquiry, which has been announced by England's Health Secretary. Here's Kate.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in mortality rate? Yes.
7 babies murdered in a neonatal unit. A further 6 the subject of murder attempts. The verdicts announced today make Lucy Letby the most prolific child killer in modern British history. The nurse had been trusted to care for the largely premature and vulnerable infants at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
She sought to deceive her colleagues and pass off the harm she caused as nothing more than a worsening of each baby's existing vulnerability. She perverted her learning and weaponized her craft to inflict harm, grief, and death.
The deaths took place over a year between June 2015 and June 2016. During the trial, the court heard babies at the unit experience sudden and inexplicable collapses. Medical experts for the prosecution suggested they were caused by injections of air into babies' circulation, air being fed into the stomach through a nasogastric tube, doses of unprescribed insulin, and overfeeding. Lucy Letby was cleared of 2 charges of attempted murder. The jury was not able to make a decision on 6 further charges. The defence argued the deaths were related to wider failings of care within the hospital. Families have remained anonymous throughout the trial, but one has spoken to the BBC. In August 2015, the mother of baby E entered the neonatal unit to visit her child.
I could immediately hear crying. Well, it felt more than crying. It was screaming. It was screaming, and I was like, what's the matter with him? I walked into the room, seen it with my boy. He had blood around his mouth, and Lucy was there. Lucy said, oh, don't worry, the registrar was coming, and she told me to go back to the ward.
Baby E would die hours later. The following day, the condition of baby E's twin brother, baby F, suddenly worsened. It would later be understood he'd been given insulin. Now 8, the parents say baby F has been left with severe learning difficulties. Lucy Letby has been found guilty of baby E's murder and the attempted murder of baby F.
I think she's a hateful human being. She's taken everything from us. Absolutely everything. Because what she's done has changed the course of our life forever.
I've been asked to read out a statement on behalf of all the families in this case. This justice will not take away from the extreme hurt, anger and distress that we've all had to experience. We are heartbroken, devastated, angry and feel numb.
Lucy Letby was in court to hear the first guilty murder verdicts, reportedly sobbing at the news. More recently, she's chosen not to appear in court. Letby will be sentenced on Monday.
Lucy Letby isn't the first medical professional to use her training and uniform to deceive and manipulate colleagues and relatives and to kill patients. We might never know why she did what she did. Here's Joe.
First NHS serial killer, and Lucy Letby is unlikely to be the last. Beverly Allett, Harold Shipman and Colin Norris were all convicted of murdering their patients. And as with Lucy Letby, in each case the authorities were asked, why weren't they stopped sooner? Dr. Shipman targeted those who trusted him, elderly vulnerable patients, and injected them with morphine. The bodies of 9 of his victims were exhumed as part of the police investigation. He was jailed in 2000 and killed himself in prison 4 years later.
She has been found with a quantity, that much, insulin in her.
Elderly patients were also the target of Colin Norris, a young nurse who went rogue. In 2008, he was found guilty of murdering 4 and trying to kill a 5th. But the closest comparison to Letby is perhaps Beverly Allett, also a nurse in her 20s, also working on a children's ward, this time in Lincolnshire. In 1993, Allett received 13 life sentences for the murder and attempted murder of infants.
And we thought we'd try and look at this to see how big the phenomenon was.
Criminologist David Wilson has studied doctors and nurses who become serial killers.
The person who kills within a healthcare setting has already developed the desire to kill before they join the healthcare setting. And if you want to kill, of course you're going to identify people who are vulnerable, people whose deaths won't be noticed. And so guess what? The people that serial killers target, by and large, are older people, or they target very, very young people, specifically in a neonatal unit in this case, where again, small babies with chronic underlying health care, where their deaths won't be commented upon or seen as being suspicious, because tragically, some babies born in that situation will die.
The judge-led inquiry following Beverly Allett's conviction in 1993 criticised the speed of the hospital's response. Again, there are comparisons with Lucy Letby. At the Countess of Chester Hospital, managers did not properly investigate how 13 babies had died unexpectedly in a single year, even though doctors had raised concerns. Susan Gilby took over running the NHS Trust soon after Lucy Letby's arrest.
The paediatricians were discussing, the terrible nights on call that they were having. One of them said, every time this is happening to me, that I'm being called in for these catastrophic events, which were unexpected and unexplained, Lucy Letby is there. And then somebody else said, yes, I found that. And then someone else had the same response. And they all realised that the common factor for each of them was Letby's presence on the unit.
The first 3 babies died in June 2015. Senior managers agreed to hold an external investigation. That never happened. 4 months later, 4 more babies were dead, and a staff analysis linked Lucy Letby to every one of them. By the following February, 10 babies had died, but when doctors asked 2 senior managers for an urgent meeting, they did not respond for 3 months. In June, over 2 days, 2 more babies died. Lucy Letby was on shift for both. By now, there had been 13 unexplained deaths. In September, the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health urged the Trust to investigate each death individually. That didn't happen. It was only the following May, after continual pressure from staff, that the Trust called the police, almost 2 years after the first unexpected deaths. When she was arrested in July 2018, Lucy Letby was still working at the Trust. No disciplinary action had been taken against her.
There is only one serial killer of babies that's worked in that organisation, and the executive team were not the people who were responsible for the deaths of those babies. But they had some opportunities to get to the bottom of what was happening. The reputation of the organisation and protecting that reputation was a big factor in how people responded to the concerns raised.
The months of inaction is no shock to this former NHS whistleblower and former NHS manager.
Not surprised at all. Trusts generally delay everything for as long as is possible. Now, What's fascinating here is that, like many NHS trusts in which tragedies have occurred, for different reasons, obviously, to this specific case, you'll find that the prompts for action come from outside the system because the system ignores its own people. If you come at the system, if you approach directors and senior managers with good news without evidence, that's welcomed, that's taken on board. And you've just got to look at what was going on, whether it's Shrewsbury and Telford, whether it's Nottingham Hospital's maternity units, or whether it's, going back to mid-staffs, yeah? When good news is put forward, even though it's baseless, it's welcomed. But when negative news, what I would perceive as factual news, when that is brought forward, even with evidence, it tends to be pushed aside because it doesn't suit the narrative.
One question remains about Lucy Letby's murders. Why?
Sometimes the healthcare serial killer will say that I was actually being merciful. This person was in a great deal of pain and I was just ending quickly. Other healthcare serial killers have often just wanted, because the unit is under such pressure, they just try to get rid of difficult patients. We've cleared another bed. It was just a kind of sort of managerial efficiency that they seemed to be expressing. I think on the basis of what emerged at court, we might be able to infer what might have motivated her. And there did seem to be a hero complex.
The babies who survived Lucy Letby's crimes will now be approaching their 8th birthdays. It has been a distressingly long wait for the doctors and nurses to be believed and for the families to get justice.
The former medical director of the Countess of Chester Hospital said in a statement, "I was determined to keep the baby unit safe and support our staff. I wanted the reviews and investigations carried out so that we could tell the parents what had happened to their children. I believe there should be an inquiry that looks at all events leading up to this trial, and I will help it in whatever way I can." The hospital's former chief executive added, "I am truly sorry for what all the families have gone through. The trial and the lengthy police investigation have shown the complex nature of the issues raised. I'll cooperate fully and openly with any post-trial inquiry." And you can watch a special BBC Panorama, Lucy Letby, the nurse who killed, on BBC iPlayer. Let's speak now to Professor James Walker, who was Clinical Director of Maternity Investigations at the Health Services Investigation Branch between 2018 and this year. Also with us, Min Alexander, retired consultant psychiatrist and NHS whistleblower. Thank you both for being on the programme. James Walker, first of all, consultants, paediatricians, as we've heard, raised concerns about Letby with the managers. Managers repeatedly failed to investigate. That beggars belief, doesn't it, when we're talking about the deaths of 13 babies?
Yes, it does, but it's not unusual. The doctors have good evidence from their own site of what they've seen and what they feel, but they don't have strong evidence that something's gone wrong. But what they've asked for is an inquiry. And what has already been said is that a lot of the executives don't want an inquiry unless there's good evidence that there should be one. So there's that gap in the middle. So that's why the system should be changed to allow incidents like this to be flagged up and investigated without decisions having to be made by the executives within the hospital. They can't really investigate themselves. There's got to be a system to allow full investigations to be carried out without decisions being made at executive level.
Do you buy that, Min Alexander, that managers, unless there is evidence, won't investigate?
I couldn't hear all of that last reply, I'm afraid, because of interference and the feedback.
Well, let me ask you. You were a whistleblower. There were people in the Countess of Chester who could be described as whistleblowers, and they were ignored. Letby wasn't removed from clinical duties until June 2016, a year after babies started dying when she was on shift. Why so slow? What's going on in managers' heads?
I I think it was indefensible that there was such an extraordinary delay in acting and investigating. And I think it was grotesque that the doctors were made to apologise to Lucy Letby. I do think that it was very typical of all the NHS cases of whistleblowing that managers resisted and attacked whistleblowers, basically. This isn't new. This is what happens to many whistleblowers, and not just in the NHS. It's not novel, it's not unique. It's just what happens.
Even though whistleblowers are protected by law in whichever sector they work in. Most workers are supposed to be protected.
Again, no, that's not true. UK whistleblowing law is very, very weak, and it's far behind most law in other jurisdictions. Most people think that UK whistleblowing law protects whistleblowers, but it doesn't. There is no proactive legal duty to protect whistleblowers conferred on anybody. There is only the UK law only allows whistleblowers to sue retrospectively for financial compensation after the fact and long after the damage has been done. So the law needs changing so that there is a proactive requirement on bodies to protect whistleblowers.
OK, so you want to see the legislation strengthened. James Walker, let me come back to you. When you look at other public inquiries, which I've been doing today into NHS scandals, whether it's mid-staffs or the maternity deaths at Nottingham, there is this theme, a common thread through many of them, that leaders, bosses, managers, the executive board don't listen, whether it's to their own staff, whether it's to patients, whether it's to relatives. Is there something within NHS culture that is the issue here, or is it to do with managers, the managerial level?
I think that you're quite right. There's a common theme through it all, and in fact, it's often the families that suffer that bring the attention of the problems to the powers that be. Then investigate, and then inquiries are carried out, and that's far too late, and it shouldn't be required. What's important, I think, is that managers, as I said earlier, want to hear good news. They want to believe their trust is good and is doing the right things. What they don't want to do is hear bad news. On the other hand, the trusts that do well are the ones who want to be the best that they can. And if they want to be the best they can, that means they've got to investigate all the problems that occur and listen to people who are called whistleblowers, but in fact are just fulfilling their registration duty by bringing up concerns they have about clinical practice.
But managers are leaders. I mean, they are supposed to lead. And OK, they may not want to hear bad news, but if 13 babies have died, I'm afraid that is horrific, and you've got to do something. It's a no-brainer, obviously.
Yes, but one of the problems is, and I don't disagree with you at all, one of the problems is that currently managers within the NHS are not necessarily leaders. And what needs to be brought in is a system where there is an automatic response to events that occur, so investigations are carried out without the need of persuading managers who are not necessarily skilled in assessment of risk and assessment of safety, patient safety, so that they can be bypassed from the point of view of investigations being carried out.
OK, would you agree with that, Mill Alexander, that you almost take the decision-making out of the hands of the managers, and when something like this, when paediatricians, consultants, whoever raise issues, there's an automatic triggering of a process to bring in, for example, the organisation that James Walker worked for until this year, the Health Services Investigations Branch?
There does need to be some form of independent review of serious concerns that kicks in at some point, because internal investigations are ineffective where serious whistleblowing concerns are concerned.
Right. Do you think, James Walker, there is a possibility that former managers could be held liable in some way? Criminally liable?
I think they might be. I don't think that is something which I'm particularly interested in. What I want to do and to lead is trying to make sure these things don't happen again. And I think.
But how often have we heard that?
I accept that as well. But I think that there has been changes. There is some new movement within the Department of Health to try and improve it. But it still doesn't go far enough. There needs to be good investigations by properly trained investigators with safety science back up so we can look at the patterns and work out why things occur. The example in this case was that, the paediatricians had concerns, but the family had concerns, other staff had concerns, but there was no joined up thinking there because there was no investigation of all these events that would have brought all these things together. And then the police, with their new powers or different powers, then could find out more information. So that's an example of the fact that it's not just a simple, let's investigate, it's actually investigating fully and properly with all the right people involved.
Min Alexander, I wonder if you think if managers could be criminally liable, would that focus minds more?
Definitely. This is a great failing in the NHS. Managers are not subject to any form of regulation comparable to the way in which clinicians are regulated. This was a recommendation of the Bristol Heart Public Inquiry over 20 years ago, but the government and NHS senior managers have been dodging this bullet ever since then. There was an opportunity to revisit this in 2019 when Tom Clark, the counsel for the Mid-Staff's Public Inquiry, provided a report which recommended a disbarring mechanism to remove senior NHS managers who have been found to be guilty of misconduct, serious misconduct. But NHS England and the government dragged this out. And very recently, they came to the conclusion that they would reject this vital recommendation. So we now have no means of removing NHS managers who have failed seriously, which leaves unprotected.
Thank you very much. Thank you for talking to us tonight and to our audience. Min Alexander, Professor James Walker, thank you very much for your time as well. Thank you. The current medical director of the Countess of Chester Hospital has issued a statement saying, "I speak for the whole trust when I say how deeply saddened and appalled we are at Lucy Letby's crimes. We are extremely sorry that these crimes were committed at our hospital, and our thoughts continue to be with all the families and loved ones of the babies who came to harm or died. Since Lucy Letby worked at our hospital, we've made significant changes to our services. I want to provide reassurance that every patient who accesses our services can have confidence in the care they will receive." In 2 days' time, England could